What Roman justice really looked like, it was brutal. A Roman citizen accused of treason was tied to a post in the Circus Maximus, while 250,000 spectators watched wild animals tear him apart piece by piece. His crime? Writing a poem that criticized the emperor. This wasn't an exception to Roman justice. This was Roman justice working exactly as designed. Welcome back to Chapters in History. I'm your host, and today we're exposing the brutal reality behind Rome's celebrated legal system. If you're new here and love discovering the dark truths behind historical myths, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the past. Everyone knows about Roman law. It's supposedly the foundation of modern legal systems, celebrated for its logic and fairness. But what Roman justice actually looked like was a system designed to terrorize the population into submission through spectacular cruelty and ritualized violence. Chapter 1. The myth versus the reality. Modern law schools teach Roman law as a triumph of legal reasoning, the 12 tables, the concept of presumed innocence, the right to legal representation. What they don't teach is that these principles applied only to a tiny elite, while the vast majority of Rome's population lived under a system of legalized terror. Roman justice operated on a simple principle. Your social class determined not just your punishment, but whether you received anything resembling a fair trial at all. Roman citizens enjoyed certain protections, but even they could be stripped of these rights at a magistrate's whim. Everyone else, slaves, foreigners, the urban poor, existed at the mercy of a system designed to crush them. The reality was that Roman courts were theaters of cruelty, where justice was secondary to public spectacle. Trials weren't about determining guilt or innocence. They were opportunities for magistrates to demonstrate their power, and for the Roman people to witness the consequences of challenging imperial authority. Roman legal procedures that sound civilized on paper became instruments of torture and practice. The right to cross-examine witnesses meant the right to torture them until they provided satisfactory testimony. The presumption of innocence applied only until accusers decided to employ enhanced interrogation techniques that made confession inevitable. What we call Roman law was actually a dual system, one set of rules for the privileged few and another, far more brutal reality for everyone else. The legal principles that influenced modern justice systems came from the sanitized version designed for Roman elites, not the bloody machinery that actually governed most people's lives. Roman magistrates understood that effective justice wasn't about fairness, it was about fear. Every public execution, every brutal punishment, every spectacular display of state power served to remind the population that resistance to Roman authority would be met with systematic, creative cruelty, designed to break both body and spirit. Chapter 2. Crucifixion. The supreme terror. When Romans wanted to send a message about the consequences of defying their authority, they turned to crucifixion, a method of execution so brutal that Roman citizens were legally protected from it, while slaves and foreigners faced it as a routine punishment for relatively minor crimes. Crucifixion wasn't just an execution method, it was psychological warfare designed to terrorize entire populations through prolonged public suffering. The process began days before the actual crucifixion, with victims subjected to scourging that alone could be fatal. Roman whips incorporated bone fragments, metal hooks, and lead weights that would tear flesh from bone with each strike. The crucifixion itself was engineered for maximum suffering rather than quick death. Victims were nailed through their wrists and feet to wooden crosses, using iron spikes designed to support body weight without causing immediate fatal injuries. Death came slowly, usually from suffocation, as victims could no longer lift themselves to breathe properly. But the true horror of Roman crucifixion lay in its scale and systematic application. After the Spartacus rebellion in 71 BCE, Romans crucified 6,000 captured slaves along the Appian Way, creating a corridor of dying men that stretched for 120 miles. Travelers using this major road were forced to witness thousands of people slowly dying in agony, a deliberate reminder of what awaited anyone who challenged Roman power. Roman crucifixions were designed as public entertainment as well as punishment. Crowds would gather to watch victims die, placing bets on how long individuals would survive and mocking their suffering. Roman soldiers would gamble for victims' clothing, while the condemned hung dying above them, turning human agony into casual amusement. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate victims. Crucifixion sites were deliberately placed along major roads and outside city gates where maximum numbers of people would witness them. Bodies were left to rot for days or weeks, attracting carrion birds and wild animals that would feed on the corpses, while families were forbidden from recovering their loved ones' remains. Roman magistrates could order crucifixion for crimes as minor as theft or disrespecting a Roman official. The legal system provided no proportionality between crimes and punishment. The goal was to create such terror that even thinking about resistance would seem impossible to potential rebels. Chapter 3. Trial by torture. Roman legal procedure included torture as a standard investigative tool, but what they called questioning involved methods so brutal they would extract confessions from anyone, regardless of guilt or innocence. The Roman justice system didn't seek truth, it sought confessions that would justify predetermined punishments. The legal torture of slaves was considered so routine that their testimony was only accepted in court if it had been extracted through physical coercion. Roman law explicitly stated that slave testimony obtained without torture was worthless, creating a system where entire classes of people could only participate in legal proceedings as victims of systematic abuse. Roman torture techniques were refined over centuries into a precise science of extracting confessions. The rack slowly pulled victims' joints apart until bones dislocated and ligaments tore. The scourge removed flesh in layers, while heated metal instruments burned confessions into victims' skin. Water torture, forcing victims to drink until their stomachs burst, provided entertainment for spectators while producing reliable confessions. But Roman legal torture wasn't limited to slaves. Citizens accused of serious crimes could be subjected to intensive questioning that differed from slave torture only in its legal terminology. The distinction between citizens and non-citizen disappeared quickly once magistrates decided that state security required enhanced interrogation methods. The most sadistic aspect of Roman legal torture was its deliberate prolongation. Torturers were trained to keep victims conscious and responsive for hours or days, carefully avoiding injuries that would cause quick death. The goal was to break psychological resistance through sustained physical agony that would make any confession seem preferable to continued suffering. Roman courts also employed family-based torture, designed to exploit emotional bonds rather than just physical pain. Parents were forced to watch their children tortured until they provided desired testimony. Spouses were mutilated in front of each other to encourage cooperation. This systematic abuse of family relationships turned love itself into a vulnerability that Roman justice could exploit. The legal framework surrounding torture was designed to give magistrates unlimited power while maintaining the fiction of procedural fairness. Roman law required that torture be reasonable and proportionate. But these terms were defined entirely by the officials conducting the interrogations, making any limits purely theoretical. Chapter 4. Gladiatorial Justice. The Roman arena wasn't just entertainment, it was a judicial institution where condemned criminals were executed in elaborate public spectacles designed to combine justice, entertainment, and political messaging into massive displays of state power. Criminals sentenced to the arena faced death in ways specifically calculated to maximize both spectacle and suffering. They weren't simply killed, they were forced to participate in elaborate theatrical production where their deaths served as climaxes to mythological reenactments, historical recreations, or pure sadistic entertainment designed to amuse Roman crowds. The concept of justice in the arena extended beyond simple execution to include ritualized humiliation and symbolic punishment. Thieves might be dressed as mythological figures who were then punished by the gods through elaborate torture executions. Political prisoners could be forced to reenact historical defeats where they played the roles of Rome's enemies being systematically destroyed. Roman audiences didn't just watch these executions, they participated in them, crowds could influence the proceedings through their reactions, demanding more creative tortures or prolonged suffering if they felt the spectacle was inadequate. The deaths of condemned criminals became collaborative entertainment, where 50,000 spectators helped determine the specific methods of execution. The scale of arena executions defied belief. During the inaugural games of the Colosseum in 80 CE, an estimated 9,000 animals and thousands of condemned criminals were killed over 100 days of continuous spectacles. These weren't isolated events, but routine expressions of Roman justice, designed to remind the population of the consequences of challenging imperial authority. Roman arena justice also served economic functions beyond mere punishment. Condemned criminals provided free labor for dangerous opportunities, like bestiality fighting and gladiatorial combat, until they died in service to Roman entertainment. Their deaths generated revenue through betting, concession sales, and the broader economic activity surrounding major public spectacles. The most disturbing aspect was how arena executions normalized extreme violence as entertainment. Roman families would attend these events as recreational activities, bringing children to watch people being torn apart by wild animals or tortured to death in elaborate theatrical productions. This systematic exposure to ritualized cruelty shaped Roman attitudes toward violence and suffering in ways that influenced the entire imperial system. Chapter 5. The Decisions of Legions. When Roman legions failed in battle or showed cowardice, the punishment wasn't just individual, it was collective and designed to terrorize entire military units through randomized execution that could claim any soldier, regardless of personal conduct. Decimation, the execution of every 10th soldier in a disgraced unit, represented Roman military justice at its most calculated and brutal. The process began with the entire legion being assembled to witness their comrade's fate, creating a psychological weapon as powerful as any physical punishment. The selection process was deliberately random, using lots or counting to determine which soldiers would die. This randomness was crucial to decimation's psychological impact. It meant that even loyal, brave soldiers could be executed for their unit's collective failure, creating a climate of fear that made every legionnaire responsible for his comrade's conduct. The execution method was designed to maximize trauma for surviving soldiers. Condemned men were beaten to death by their own comrades, using clubs and stones, forcing the legion to participate directly in the punishment of their friends and brothers in arms. This collective participation in execution created psychological bonds of shared guilt that strengthened unit cohesion through trauma. Decimation also included additional punishments for the surviving soldiers, designed to extend their suffering beyond the immediate executions. Decimated legions were forced to camp outside fortifications, eat barley instead of wheat, and perform the most dangerous military assignments until they could redeem themselves through exceptional valor in subsequent battles. The threat of decimation shaped Roman military culture in profound ways. Soldiers understood that their survival depended not just on their own conduct, but on the performance of their entire unit, creating intense peer pressure that made cowardice or disobedience virtually impossible. Every legionnaire became responsible for monitoring and controlling his comrades' behavior. Roman generals used decimation sparingly because of its devastating impact on unit morale, but the threat alone was often sufficient to maintain discipline. The knowledge that collective punishment awaited entire units for individual failures created a culture of mutual surveillance and intervention that made Roman armies remarkably self-regulating. The psychological sophistication of decimation as a disciplinary tool reveals the depth of Roman understanding about human psychology and group dynamics. By making survival dependent on collective performance, Roman military justice created fighting units that were literally bound together by shared fear of randomly distributed death. Chapter 6. Social class and selective brutality. Roman justice operated on an explicit hierarchy, where your social status determined not just the severity of your punishment, but the methods used to determine your guilt and the procedures followed during your trial. This wasn't corruption of the system, it was the system working exactly as designed. Roman citizens convicted of capital crimes could demand execution by beheading, a quick, relatively dignified death reserved for those with legal status. Non-citizens faced crucifixion, burning, or being thrown to wild animals, punishments specifically designed to be as prolonged and humiliating as possible. The distinction between citizens and non-citizen justice extended to every aspect of legal proceedings. Citizens could appeal magistrates' decisions, demand jury trials, and even exile themselves to avoid execution. Slaves and foreigners had no such rights and could be executed immediately upon accusation, often without any trial at all. Even among Roman citizens, social class determined treatment within the justice system. Senators and equites, wealthy merchants, accused of crimes were often allowed to go into comfortable exile rather than face trial, while poor citizens received the full brutality of Roman legal procedures, including torture, public humiliation, and spectacular executions. Roman law explicitly codified these distinctions, creating separate legal categories with different rights, procedures, and punishments. The honestieres, upper classes, and humiliores, lower classes, lived under essentially different legal systems despite sharing Roman citizenship, with the wealthy enjoying protections that were denied to the poor. The practical result was a justice system designed to terrorize the masses while protecting the elite. Spectacular public punishments served as entertainment for the wealthy, while warning the poor about the consequences of challenging social order. Roman magistrates understood that unequal justice served political purposes beyond simple punishment. By demonstrating that the law itself recognized social hierarchies, the justice system reinforced broader imperial ideologies about natural inequality and the divine right of elites to rule over lesser peoples. The sophistication of Roman legal discrimination reveals careful thought about how justice could serve as an instrument of social control. Every aspect of the system, from investigation procedures to execution methods, was designed to reinforce existing power structures while creating the illusion of legal fairness. Final chapter: the legacy of terror. Roman justice succeeded in its primary goal, creating a population so terrorized by the consequences of resistance that active rebellion became virtually unthinkable for most of the empire's history. The system's brutality wasn't a flaw, it was a feature that maintained imperial control through systematic psychological warfare. The spectacle of Roman justice served multiple functions beyond punishment. Public executions provided entertainment that channeled popular energy into approved activities while demonstrating state power. The randomness and creativity of punishments created uncertainty that made resistance seem impossibly dangerous for rational people. Roman legal procedures became templates for authoritarian control that influenced oppressive systems throughout history. The combination of legal formalism with systematic brutality, the use of torture as investigation, and the creation of separate justice systems for different social classes all became standard tools of imperial control. But Roman justice also revealed something disturbing about human nature and social organization. The system's brutality wasn't imposed by foreign conquerors. It was created and supported by Roman citizens who found entertainment in others' suffering and security in their own privileged status within the hierarchical system. The normalization of extreme violence as entertainment and justice had profound effects on Roman society and culture. Generations of Romans grew up watching people tortured to death as routine public events, creating attitudes toward human suffering that shaped imperial policies throughout the Mediterranean world. Modern legal systems inherited many Roman concepts, but they consciously rejected the brutal enforcement mechanisms that made Roman justice effective. The challenge for contemporary societies is maintaining order and justice without resorting to the systematic terror that Romans employed so successfully. The effectiveness of Roman justice as a tool of social control raises uncomfortable questions about the relationship between law and power. Roman legal principles survived because they served the interests of subsequent elites, but the brutal enforcement mechanisms were abandoned, not because they didn't work, but because they worked too well for modern sensibilities. Roman justice ultimately demonstrates that legal systems reflect the values and power structures of the societies that create them. The brutality we've explored today wasn't aberrant behavior. It was the logical expression of a society built on conquest, slavery, and systematic inequality maintained through carefully applied terror. The Romans created a justice system that perfectly served their imperial goals, maintaining control over diverse populations through fear while preserving the fiction of legal procedure. It was brutal, effective, and absolutely intentional in every detail. If this exploration of Roman justice has shocked you, hit that like button and subscribe to Chapters in History for more deep dives into the realities behind historical myths. Which aspect of Roman legal brutality surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring the chapters that shaped our world, even the ones that reveal uncomfortable truths about systems we thought we understood.